Birds that once painted the sky with life now linger only in silent, heartbreaking photographs.
And it's almost certainly the first animal species that human beings actually exterminated.
Their extinction wasn't heralded by any warning. It was quietly woven by human hands.
These men with guns were terrified.
And we lost it from billions to none in a matter of a few decades.
From hunters' guns to invasive diseases, each photo captures the last breath of a species. Some of these birds died alone, calling for mates that would never answer.
That's the last male of a species, singing for a female who will never come.
Stay with us as we unveil heartbreaking tales of the birds we'll never see again. Let's begin on a tiny island where 3 fishermen were about to erase a species forever for a few dollars. The Great Auk was not a penguin, though it looked like one, standing nearly 3 feet tall, completely flightless, and once spread across the North Atlantic in colonies where they numbered in the hundreds of thousands. Because they could not fly or run on land, hunters simply herded them onto ships by the thousands, killing some for meat and sometimes burning their oil-rich bodies as fuel when firewood ran out. On July 3, 1844, museum collectors in Europe hired 3 fishermen to sail to Eldey Island off the coast of Iceland with a brutal assignment: bring back the last living great auks on Earth. When the men reached the cliff, they found the final pair standing beside their only egg. The birds were seized, strangled with bare hands, and the egg was mistakenly crushed underfoot. For this, the men were paid about $100. The species was gone in a single morning. Years later, the final known photograph of a living great auk would surface, turning this moment into one of the most devastating endings ever recorded. Today, all that remains are their preserved bodies in the museum. Walking through New Zealand at night about a century ago, you'd hear what sounded like a person laughing in the darkness. Except it wasn't human, it was this owl. The laughing owl nested in rocky caves instead of trees, hunting through the night and making maniacal shrieks that genuinely sounded like human laughter. Early European settlers found the call deeply unsettling, echoing across empty landscapes in the dark. When they brought cats, rats, and stoats, those predators raided nests relentlessly. Some settlers hunted the owls directly, possibly because that laugh made them uncomfortable. By the early 1900s, sightings were rare. The last confirmed specimen was collected in 1914. Hikers reported hearing the distinctive call through the 1920s and 30s, but no one could prove it. The final photographs show a creature with a small head and huge eyes that looks almost comical. This was called one of the most beautiful parrots on Earth. But it made one fatal mistake: nesting inside termite mounds on the ground, where anything could reach them. The paradise parrot flashed turquoise, red, yellow, and green through Queensland's grasslands like a living rainbow. Most parrots nest safely in tree holes, but these birds carved chambers inside termite mounds sitting right on the ground, leaving their eggs and chicks vulnerable to every predator around. When a massive drought hit in 1902, their population collapsed. By the 1920s, spotting one was almost impossible. The last confirmed photograph from 1922 shows a paradise parrot slipping into its termite mound nest, a snapshot of a bird disappearing into a hole in the ground. By 1950, they were officially declared extinct, and that single photograph is all we have left. After his mate died in a hurricane, the last male spent 5 years singing alone in the forest, calling for a female who would never come, and someone recorded his desperate song before he vanished. The Kauai-o'o was a black honeycreeper with yellow thigh feathers that lived in Hawaii's mountain forests. It fed mainly on arthropods and fruits. When European settlers brought mosquitoes carrying bird malaria, the population collapsed. By 1981, only one breeding pair remained. Then a hurricane tore through Kauai and killed the female. For the next 5 years, the male kept singing his mating call, a haunting whistle echoing through the empty forest. In 1987, a researcher recorded him one final time. The bird was never seen again. Passenger pigeons were the most abundant bird species on Earth, with migrating flocks so massive they'd take 3 days to pass overhead and turn the sky black for miles. They nested in colonies covering 850 square miles, sometimes packing 100 nests into a single tree. Soon, settlers saw them as unlimited meat, and slaughter began. 50,000 birds killed in a single day wasn't unusual. By 1900, the last wild passenger pigeon was shot in Ohio. Martha, born around 1885 in a Chicago breeding program, ended up at the Cincinnati Zoo with 2 male companions, but both males died by 1910. Martha lived alone, growing weaker after a stroke until she was found dead on her cage floor. They immediately froze her in a 300-pound block of ice and rushed her to the Smithsonian, where her mounted body still reminds us that abundance means nothing when you push a species too far. The ivory-billed woodpecker was massive, with a gleaming white bill and striking black and white plumage. Referred to as America's largest woodpecker, it measures 20 inches long with a wingspan of 30 inches, and an ivory bill that looks almost too big for its head. It needed vast tracts of old-growth forest filled with recently dead trees where beetle larvae thrived. When logging companies swept through the southern United States in the early 1900s, clear-cutting those ancient forests, the woodpecker's habitat shrank catastrophically. By the 1920s, only scattered populations remained in remote swamps. Ornithologist James Tanner photographed and filmed a small group in Louisiana's Singer Tract during the 1930s, creating the last confirmed images. Incas, the last Carolina parakeet, died in the same cage where Martha had died 4 years earlier, and some say the Cincinnati Zoo became a graveyard where America's most colorful birds went to vanish forever. The Carolina parakeet was the only parrot native to the eastern United States, a flash of green, yellow, and orange that nested in tree cavities from Florida to New York. Farmers hated them because they'd descend on fruit orchards in screeching flocks, but what really doomed them was a peculiar behavior. When one bird was shot, the others would circle back to check on it, making them incredibly easy to slaughter. That behavior, combined with habitat loss and possibly disease from domestic poultry, erased them from the wild by the early 1900s. Incas, a male, lived at the Cincinnati Zoo with his mate Lady Jane, but she died in 1917. The next year, on February 21, 1918, Incas was found dead in the same aviary that had held Martha. Heath hens were a subspecies of prairie chicken that lived along the eastern seaboard, hunted so heavily for food that they'd vanished from the mainland by the 1870s. Conservationists created a reserve, and the population surged to 2,000 by 1916, giving everyone hope that the species might be saved. Then disaster struck. A wildfire in that same year killed most of them. The survivors faced an unusually harsh winter. Then an influx of goshawks hunted what remained. By the 1920s, mostly males survived, and inbreeding weakened those who were left. Booming Ben, the last one, was last seen on March 11, 1932, performing his courtship display alone. Searchers looked for years afterward but found nothing. The Laysan rail was a tiny flightless bird that survived on an island paradise until humans brought rabbits and rats, and the last one died on Midway Atoll during World War II, when the very soldiers who might have saved it accidentally introduced new predators. The Laysan rail lived on Laysan Island in Hawaii, a speck of land in the Pacific where life seemed perfect around 1900. With no natural predators, these thumb-sized birds had evolved to lose their ability to fly, instead scurrying across the sand like miniature shadows. Then, in 1903, rabbits were introduced to the island for commercial purposes, and they ate the vegetation down to nothing. Rats also arrived and immediately started devouring eggs and chicks. By 1923, the species was extinct on Laysan itself. Fortunately, scientists had translocated some rails to Midway Atoll in 1891 and again in 1913, where they thrived for decades. But during World War II, military construction on Midway brought rats, and by 1944 they were gone. There's haunting film footage of the last individual, a lone bird running across the sand and watching it, you realize you're seeing the final moments of a species that had survived for thousands of years until humans showed up. Orange Band was the last one left, surrounded by similar-looking birds that weren't quite right, and when he died in his cage on June 16, 1987, he took an entire species with him. The dusky seaside sparrow lived in Florida's salt marshes near Cape Canaveral until NASA decided to build a space center there. To control mosquitoes, they flooded the marshes with pesticides, and the sparrows started dying. By 1980, scientists could only find 6 birds, and every single one was male. They tried crossbreeding with Scott's seaside sparrows to save some genetic material, but Orange Band, named for his leg tag, was the last pure dusky. He spent his final years watching hybrid sparrows that looked almost like him but weren't his species. When he died at Disney's Discovery Island, an entire lineage that had existed for thousands of years ended. Scientists discovered this bird in 1973, and by 2004 it was extinct, just 31 years from when humans found a new species. Then it's gone forever, the fastest extinction we've ever watched happen. Students hiking through Maui's remote forests stumbled across a small, black-faced bird no one had seen before. They'd discovered the po'uli, a honey creeper that lived in dense mountain forest and ate tree snails. By the time scientists realized what they'd found, the species was already dying. This was a result of introduced predators, habitat loss, and disease that had trapped them in shrinking forest fragments. By 2004, only 3 birds remained, scattered across different valleys and unable to find each other. Scientists captured one male, hoping to breed him, but he died in captivity days later. Searches for the other 2 turned up nothing. Think about that. A species survived for thousands of years in those forests, stayed hidden until 1973, and then disappeared completely before most people even knew it existed. That's how fast we're losing birds now. The Guadalupe caracara was a bold raptor that lived only on Guadalupe Island off Mexico. These brown hawks with cream-yellow faces weren't afraid of humans. They'd walk right up to houses hunting chickens. Originally, they fed on seals and sea lions that bred on the island in massive colonies, but when hunters slaughtered those animals nearly to extinction in the 1800s, the caracaras turned to eating young goats instead. Goat herders declared war, poisoning and shooting them systematically. When museum collector Rollo Beck arrived in December 1900, he found 11 birds and killed 9 for museum specimens, leaving just 2 alive. Someone reported seeing one in 1903, but by 1906 they were gone. The Guadalupe caracara is one of the few birds humans deliberately hunted to complete extinction. This flightless bird was discovered and completely destroyed within a single year, possibly by one lighthouse keeper's cat that kept bringing them back dead. When workers built a lighthouse on Stevens Island, New Zealand, in 1894, they discovered a tiny bird hopping through the scrub like a mouse, something no scientist had ever seen. The lighthouse keeper's cat, Tibbles, started hunting them and bringing them back to the house. The keeper, David Lyle, was an amateur naturalist who recognized they might be special and sent specimens to museums. By 1895, every wren on the island was dead. Some historians now think feral cats from the construction crew were the real killers, and Tibbles got unfairly blamed. But either way, the result is the same. A species that evolved in isolation for thousands of years was wiped out within months of humans' arrival. Only 15 museum specimens exist worldwide, and no one ever photographed a living one. The Aleotra grebe was a small, flightless bird that lived on Lake Aleotra in Madagascar, the island's largest lake and the grebe's entire world. These birds built floating nests and dove for small fish, perfectly adapted to their isolated ecosystem. Then people introduced snakehead fish, hoping to create a commercial fishery. Scientists warned the fish would devastate everything in the lake, but no one listened. The snakeheads ate the grebe's food supply and likely attacked the birds themselves. Monofilament fishing nets drowned the ones that survived. The last confirmed sighting came in 1985. after years of searching, turned up nothing. The species was declared extinct in 2010. The last wild one was so lonely he started flying around with a different species of macaw because she was the only bird that looked even remotely like him. Until one day in 2000, he just disappeared. The Spix's macaw was a striking blue parrot from Brazil that nested in caraba trees along creek valleys. Pet traders captured them heavily, and habitat destruction wiped out their forests. By the 1990s, only one male remained in the wild near a small town. Conservationists watched him for years, hoping he'd find a mate, but no other Spix's macaws showed up. Instead, he paired with a female blue-winged macaw, a completely different species, and they'd fly together every day, this heartbreaking partnership born from having no other choice. In 2000, the male vanished and was never seen again. About 180 survive in captivity now, and recent reintroduction attempts have started. But whether captive-bred birds can survive in forests so changed from what their ancestors knew is still uncertain. This photo of him with the wrong mate is what loneliness looks like. This massive seabird was so large and flightless that sailors could just walk up and club them to death. And within 100 years of being discovered, hungry crews had eaten every single one. The spectacled cormorant lived only on Bering Island in Russia, weighing up to 14 pounds. The largest cormorant species that ever existed. They had white patches around their eyes that looked like glasses, and they'd completely lost the ability to fly after evolving on an island with no predators. Georg Wilhelm Steller first described them in 1741 when he was shipwrecked there, and at that time they were everywhere along the rocky shores. Then fur traders and sailors figured out these giant birds couldn't escape and made excellent food. They'd just walk up with clubs and kill as many as they needed. Within about a century, they were gone. The last confirmed sighting came around 1852. Only a handful of museum specimens exist today. From the moment scientists first described this duck in 1790, it was already rare, scattered across wetlands in India, Bangladesh, and Myanmar. That soft pink head made them unmistakable. And they had this strange defense where instead of flying away, they'd dive underwater and hide. British colonists hunted them and drained their wetlands, and the last confirmed sighting came from India in 1949. But here's the thing, these ducks were nocturnal, most active at night, which made spotting them incredibly difficult even when they were common. To this day, local people in northern Myanmar claim they see pink-headed ducks in swamps so remote that scientists can't reach them to verify. The IUCN won't officially declare them extinct because those swamps are vast and unexplored. They're listed as critically endangered, stuck in this limbo between being extinct and maybe still alive somewhere. The male and female had completely different beaks. That of the male was short and straight, while the female's was long and curved, so they'd work together as a team to find food. And when Europeans started paying cash for those beautiful tail feathers, the partnership ended forever. The huia was a New Zealand wattle bird with glossy black plumage and white-tipped tail feathers that Maori chiefs wore as status symbols. What made them truly unique was how males and females evolved different tools. The male's beak could hammer into wood, while the females could probe deep crevices, so pairs would coordinate their hunting. Maori took feathers sustainably from dead birds for centuries. Then, European collectors arrived offering money, and everything changed. Hunters killed them in massive numbers, while logging destroyed their forest habitat, and introduced rats ate their eggs. The last confirmed sighting came in 1907. Those magnificent tail feathers that made them special became exactly what doomed them. This tiny swamp songbird vanished so quietly that nobody's sure when the last one died. No famous final bird, just a species that faded away like a ghost until ornithologists realized they hadn't seen one in years. Bachman's warbler was a small migratory bird that bred in southeastern U.S. swamps and wintered in Cuba. It was never particularly common, which made tracking its decline nearly impossible. Throughout the 1900s, their swampy forests were drained and logged, and the birds just kept disappearing. The last confirmed U.S. sighting came from South Carolina in 1962. Someone claimed they saw one in Cuba in 1981, but nothing after that. Extensive searches turned up nothing. The warbler simply slipped away unnoticed until one day ornithologists looked up and realized the species was probably gone. The Eskimo curlew had one of the longest migrations on Earth, from Arctic tundra to Argentina and back, thousands of miles twice a year. When they stopped in the Great Plains to feed, market hunters were waiting. In the late 1800s, they shot tens of thousands of curlews, piling carcasses into wagons headed for city markets while prairie grasslands got converted to farmland and destroyed the birds' stopover habitat. By 1900, they were already rare. The last confirmed specimen was shot in Barbados in 1963. There were possible sightings in Texas in the 1980s and Canada in the 2000s, but nothing verified. This spectacular Caribbean parrot filled Cuban skies with red, yellow, and blue for centuries until pet traders and hunters wiped them out before anyone took notice. The Cuban macaw was a large, vibrant parrot that Spanish colonists reported seeing in massive flocks back in the 1500s. But by the 1800s, they were already becoming scarce. Two things killed them. Wealthy European collectors paid big money for exotic pets, so traders captured them heavily and shipped them overseas, while locals hunted them for food. The macaws also needed large hollow trees for nesting, and deforestation eliminated those. The last confirmed wild bird was seen around 1885, though some sources say they might have lasted into the early 1890s. No photographs exist of living Cuban macaws, only museum skins and old naturalist descriptions, making them ghosts we can barely remember. In 1770, Captain Cook's expedition found these quails everywhere across New Zealand. But just 105 years after Europeans arrived, they were completely gone, the first native bird lost to colonization. The New Zealand quail was a small ground-dwelling game bird that lived across both main islands. When Joseph Banks documented them during Cook's voyage, Maori were hunting them sustainably for food. Then European settlers showed up with cats, rats, and stoats that devoured its eggs and chicks. They cleared massive areas for farming, destroying habitat. They also brought their own hunting culture and started taking quails in huge numbers for sport and meat. These little birds evolved without mammalian predators, so they had no defenses against what was coming. By the 1860s, sightings were rare. The last confirmed specimen was collected in 1875. After that, despite searches and occasional unverified reports, the species was never reliably seen again. The New Zealand quail holds the unfortunate distinction of being the first endemic bird species to go extinct following European colonization. The Guam rail was a small flightless bird living peacefully in Guam's forests, until brown tree snakes from Australia showed up on cargo ships. With no natural predators and endless prey, the snakes multiplied explosively. They're nocturnal climbers that raided every nest they could find, and by the 1980s, most of Guam's native birds were gone. The rail population collapsed so fast that by 1987 the species was extinct in the wild, with only 21 birds surviving in captivity. Here's the slight silver lining. Captive breeding worked, and rails have been reintroduced to nearby Cocos Island and parts of Guam, where snakes are controlled. But they need constant human management and can never truly return to the wild as long as brown tree snakes dominate the island. It's a provisional resurrection at best, a species that only exists because humans are artificially keeping it alive. The Labrador duck went extinct, and ornithologists still have no idea why, making it one of the most mysterious disappearances in bird history. The Labrador duck was a small sea duck that lived along the northeastern coast of North America, diving for mollusks in shallow waters. Strangely, it was never particularly common even in historical records, which has left scientists baffled about what caused its extinction. The last confirmed specimen was shot at Elmira, New York in 1878. Unlike passenger pigeons or great auks, there's no clear story of overhunting or habitat destruction massive enough to explain their disappearance. Its flesh was supposedly unappetizing, so it wasn't heavily hunted for food. Some theorists point to mussels being overharvested, cutting off their food supply, or perhaps changes in water quality affecting shellfish populations. The truth is, we'll probably never know what killed them off, which makes their loss even more haunting. This ground pigeon was so tame that hunters could literally walk up and pick them off their roosts with bare hands, and only 6 specimens exist to prove they were ever real. The Choiseul pigeon lived on a single Solomon Island speck with a distinctive blue crest, roosting in small groups close to the ground. They'd never encountered a predator before, so when humans showed up, the birds had zero fear. They'd just sit there while people grabbed them. In 1904, collector Albert Stuart Meek found 6 adults and 1 egg. After that, nobody ever saw one again despite extensive searches. The indigenous people said introduced cats killed them all because the pigeon had never faced a carnivorous mammal before. The Kamau's flute-like song was so hauntingly beautiful, it echoed through Kauai's rainforests for thousands of years, until 1989, when the last one vanished, and those misty valleys fell permanently silent. The Kamau was a brown thrush, whose melodious calls rang through Hawaii's mountain forests like natural music. They nested in tree cavities and fed on fruits and insects, perfectly adapted to their island home. Habitat destruction started the decline. Then rats, cats, and mongooses raided nests relentlessly. The final blow came from mosquito-borne avian malaria and pox sweeping through in the 1970s and 1980s. The species retreated higher into the mountains, trying to escape mosquitoes, but even high elevations weren't safe. The last confirmed sighting came in 1989 from the Alakai Wilderness Preserve. Native Hawaiians prized the Oahu ooze striking yellow feathers for creating elaborate cloaks and helmets for royalty. The black honey-eaters lived in Oahu's mountain forests, feeding on nectar and pollinating native flowers. In 1837, German naturalist Ferdinand Deppe collected the last known specimens from the hills behind Honolulu. After that, they were never seen again. By the time ornithologist John Gould scientifically described and named the species in 1860, it had already been extinct for 23 years. The exact cause remains uncertain, likely feather hunting, habitat destruction, and European diseases combined. The Mariana mallard didn't get hunted or poisoned. It got genetically erased through hybridization with introduced ducks until no pure individuals remained, absorbed into extinction without a single bird dying violently. The Mariana mallard lived on Pacific islands, including Guam, distinct enough to be its own subspecies or possibly species. Then humans brought domestic mallards and feral ducks to the islands, and the Mariana mallards started interbreeding with them. Over generations, the pure genetic line got increasingly diluted. By the 1970s, conservationists struggled to find birds without hybridization signs. The last apparently pure Mariana mallard was seen around 1981. After that, only hybrids remained, ducks that looked similar but weren't the same. These birds are gone forever, but they're not the last species we'll lose unless we break the pattern that killed every single one of them. Every extinction you've seen followed the same script. Humans arrived, brought changes the birds couldn't adapt to, and by the time anyone realized what was happening, it was too late. Right now, hundreds of bird species are following that exact same path, teetering on extinction's edge. These photographs aren't just history, they're mirrors showing us the consequences of inaction, and the next generation will judge us by whether we learned from them or repeated the same mistakes. If you enjoyed this one, subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.